And this is my personal discipline project for EDN 5470. Starting with my philosophy of discipline, I define discipline as enforcing routines and procedures that are going to cut back on negative behaviors and allow learning to occur in your classroom. Personally, I feel like the purpose of discipline is to teach your students self-regulation, positive behavior, and motivation. In one of the articles that I chose, The Power of Positive Relationships, Brown really talks about collaboration and community, creating that sense of collaboration and community in your classroom as well, and the role that it'll play in discipline, which we'll get into later. Teacher duties. Our text told us that establishing and enforcing your rules and your procedures are your duties. Another source I found, Burden and Bird, talked about creating a supportive and caring environment and how your students feeling cared about can really play a role in discipline. They also talked about, again, knowing and connecting with your students. And I personally feel like your duty is to reinforce positive behavior, redirect negative. Your students also have duties in your classroom when it comes to discipline as well. They need to come making an effort to learn, willing to make an effort to learn, refrain from interrupting their learning process as well as the learning process of the students around them, and to display acceptable behavior. We learned a lot of theories from a lot of different theorists. Personally, I felt like some of the most beneficial ones that play a role in my personal theory of discipline are spending the first 2 weeks of school on rules and procedures. The Wongs really stressed that, and I really saw the importance of that this school year, this was my first year starting at the beginning of the year, and really spending that time teaching your students your procedures in your classroom. It's very beneficial. Making a 3-step response plan to misbehavior. Burden and Bird and Methods for Effective Teaching gave this intervention strategy, and I really think that I'll be using it. The steps are situational assistance, in which you remove distracting objects when you see misbehavior occurring, reinforce appropriate behaviors, which could be something as simple as you see a student that is behaving and you offer them praise, and providing support with reinforcing routines. Step 2, mild responses. Ignore certain behaviors. Use nonverbal signals such as quiet signals or asking your students to settle down. And proximity, standing near the student. Step 3 was moderate responses. Withdrawing privileges, changing some seating, and assigning reflection writing, which I'm really a big fan of, having students write down what they could have done differently. Creating that classroom community again. And Lamova and Atkins really talked about setting high expectations for your students from day one, letting them know what you expect and that you're not settling for less. Professional and ethical demeanor. I personally feel like you have to inspire students with your passion for learning. If they don't see that you're passionate about it, they're not going to be interested in it. Examining and improving nonverbal communication. Brown talks about that again, and about just checking yourself and how you're communicating with your students. Learn all student names within 48 hours. I really felt like that was important last year in my classroom, and it made my students feel known and seen and really responsive to me. There was an article in which Turnbull talks about culturally responsive teaching. So we know that our students have different experiences, different perspectives, strengths and needs, and that they come from different backgrounds. They're very diverse, and we can use that and get positive learning outcomes out of it. Meeting the needs of our ELL students. I have some English language learners this year. I had some last year as well, but this year I had a Chinese student, which I really knew not much of anything about their culture, and that really has been a challenge for me. But I've seen that bringing in just stories, like read alouds that deal with Chinese culture or talking about Chinese holidays, and really just making that student feel included in my classroom has helped. Modeling positive language and respect, and using body language, posture, and good carriage all play a role in professional and ethical demeanor. Rules to support student behavior. So every day we say our school rules in my classroom, and I love that we act them out because we use whole brain teaching so that students are not just mindlessly repeating something, but they're actively engaged while they're doing it. And we have rule 1, follow directions quickly. Rule 2, raise your hand for permission to speak. Rule 3, raise your hand for permission to leave your seat. Rule 4, make smart choices. Rule 5, keep your dear teacher happy. My students love it. They think about what they're doing and what it means while they're saying them. According to our text again, teachers should develop a small number of rules and a large number of procedures, and I completely agree with that. If you teach your students how to navigate through the day, I feel like you avoid a lot of problems, and we have procedures for everything: breakfast, unpacking, lining up, using the bathroom, taking out our Chromebooks, what we put in our folders, what we don't put in our folders. There's a procedure for that guides us through the day. Treating your students with dignity and respect at all times are good ways to support behavior. And systems, routines, and structure. Having those systems and those routines in place is what really gives your classroom structure, according to Lamov and Atkins. Proactively preventing and reducing inappropriate behavior. Getting ahead of inappropriate behavior, you have to establish positive relationships with your students. They have to know that you love them and that you like them. And most of the time when the feeling is mutual, they are willing to cooperate. They all have their days, but they're willing to cooperate, I found. Explicitly teaching these rules, again, they have to understand the requirements. If they don't understand them, they are not going to be able to follow them, which our text tells us in detail. Same side chats. I really like this concept that Kagan brought in with the win-win discipline, and I found that I was already kind of using that without thinking about it or knowing about it. Having your students sit down with you and have those conversations about what we'd expect, what we may not have done right, and the consequences that follow. Students and teachers understanding the why behind lessons, according to Wiggins and McTeague in an article that I shared. Students need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, even when it comes to things that we're learning in class, not just our rules and our behaviors. If they don't understand how this benefits them and why we're doing it this way, why our lessons are set up this way, why something might have changed, they aren't always willing to cooperate. So I think that's important. And again, modeling positive communication and body language. For some of our students, we are the only source of positive communication and body language, sadly. So if we want it to not, those negative behaviors to not make their way into our classrooms, we definitely have to show them. Supporting student efforts to participate and persevere. We need to make our instruction engaging. It has to be interesting for the kids. It has to be something that they want to do, that they want to learn. Brown talks about embracing our student individuality. Our students are going to have different wants. They're going to have different needs, different hobbies, different things that they like. And we can harp on that. Lesson structure. This is something that I was already using and I love it. The I do, we do, you do method. I feel like my students are much more willing to participate and give effort whenever they know that I'm going to show them. I'm going to make sure they understand it because we're going to do it together. And then they're going to be responsible for it. And they'll even say, oh, this is the part where we do it together. Or is this the part where I do it on my own? So they know. Burden and Bird talked about holding our students academically accountable. Got to let them know that there's a grading system. They're expected to complete their work, that they will be monitored, and their progress, we're going to see what you're doing and what you're not doing. I really like the concept of backwards planning as well. Wiggins and McTeague talked about this. So you look at your objectives, your content, the depth of knowledge that your students need to achieve, and then you structure your lesson. So it kind of serves as a roadmap to show you where you're going. Redirecting students when misbehavior occurs. Brown talked about being the CEO of your own classroom and letting your students know that you are in charge. Consequences should be attached to the rules. I'm a firm believer in that. Students need to know that there are consequences to not doing the right thing. Your calm down corner, I use that. I love it. It allows students to self-regulate, and I don't always have to intervene in what's going on, because sometimes they bring problems from home that have nothing to do with me or anyone in the room, and they're able to have their space and their moment to calm down. Using punishment only when rewards or non-punitive interventions have not worked. So trying other things before we start dealing out those consequences. Burden and Bird talked about that as well. Communicate and discipline approaches to students, administration, and families. Writing a plan to share with your administration so that they know what you plan on doing and they're able to have your back whenever the time comes, or if the time comes. I also have my students and my parents sign a contract at the beginning of the year, basically agreeing that they're going to adhere to our rules and our expectations. Letting students and families get to know who you are and your expectations. Brown talked about that, and I think that's very beneficial, just in people knowing who you are, where you come from, your background, and understanding what you expect. Spending the first 2 weeks of school again, teaching those rules and procedures, having those procedures and those rules posted in the classroom at all times, and daily recitation and acting out rules at the start of the day plays a big role in my classroom management. Finally, energizing your classroom. Smiling, using body language, voice inflection, and volume to your advantage is something Brown talks about in that article. I can be very animated at times. I use lots of accents. I'm loud. I'm goofy. It gets the kids' interest, and I have fun while I'm doing it. Varying your instruction. Burden and Bird talked about just all the different ways to engage your students. You need to challenge your thinking ability, group them, and offer collaborative learning opportunities. You have to differentiate your instructions so that they're engaged and challenged, and you're meeting them where they are, and provide different activities so they're not doing the same thing all the time. Provide incentives in the form of enjoyable activities, which I like to do Splash Learn and cool math games and any little online game where they are still learning and it's school appropriate. My students love working for that, and I love that I'm not passing out M&Ms and goldfish all day as incentives, and they actually are working for something that still includes learning. And they also love adjusting roles. So Lamava and Atkins talked about this, and they love to play the teacher. If it's nothing but one of my hardest workers getting to hold the clicker and flip through the PowerPoint and read the titles or the headings, they love feeling like they're in charge and they're helping me out and they're taking on that role. And these are my references. Thank you.